Hi guys. Today is a day. I'm feeling really weird right now. Really weird. It is also raining and I'm filming this video late in the afternoon because my husband's schedule, it's the whole thing. A bit of personal news that I'd like to share for anyone that knows me for a while. Me and my husband are having a girl, so fun times. He is very excited about this news. I'm also, I would have been excited either way, but I don't know. I'm excited to see him with a daughter, okay? My cat is over there. Sonny, you want to say hi? You want to say hello? He says hi. All right. Let's get this started. I'm having like these weird cramps that go up to my neck. I don't know what that's about. Don't know what that's today. I promised myself I was going to film despite the fact that I'm not loving the setup at the moment, but I gotta pull through. I gotta keep my promises to myself. You know what I mean? That's what I gotta do. So without further ado, let's get into the video. 2 weeks ago, someone made a comment on one of my videos. He said something like, I gave myself away when I mentioned that I was reading a book by Laura Bates, a quote man hater, or rather known man hater. Now, several things are wrong with this comment. If I'm learning about a certain type of ideology and the thinking and perspective of those I disagree with, the logical thing to do would be to actually learn about what they say. No? Or are we just supposed to be making assumptions? I watched a lot of Manosphere content, not with the drive or with the reason to disagree with them, but that's what I found myself doing. And so I wanted to get a perspective from someone that I would not normally read on that same space. So it seems we've gotten to a great place by making assumptions to what other people are saying. If I tell you that I'm learning about ideologies that led to the sheer and utter chaos that was the 20th century, would it be problematic for me to read the Communist Manifesto or even I don't think so, but many people do. Many people think it would be problematic for me to read those things. It is completely frowned upon. You cannot learn about what the enemy says only through approved channels. That's the message, right? Now, Laura Bates, I personally knew nothing about her before I started reading her book. But so far, she has not seemed like a man hater, like this man characterized her. Maybe I'm being naive, but she does give a lot of grace to men in her books. Look at him. He's so cute. She mentions the loneliness epidemic. She mentions young boys losing their way and feeling lost without the proper role models. She mentions grieving fathers and divorced men fighting for custody. She talks about that. But of course, her book is about the manosphere, where she discusses things like the men who hate women so much that end up going on killing sprees. Now, you might think she's a man hater, but she is not going around killing men. So I, quote, gave myself away by reading forbidden books. By reading the books of the enemy. If the only way I am not a feminist is by pandering to men, by agreeing with everything the manosphere says and they propose, by trying to be another Pearl Davis who grovels for male attention, who will accept a cheater and a man who will not ultimately commit to her. If those are the terms of which I have to agree to not be a feminist, then I guess I'd rather be one. A while ago, I also started reading the famous book by Betty Friedan, The Feminine Mystique. Another forbidden book. Yes, indeed. I tell you, my intention with this book was to be more rounded and to actually see what a classic feminist was saying, or a classic for our times before, of course, criticizing her, because I had criticized her before reading her book, and after some reflection, I realized that was wrong of me. If you don't know, Betty Friedan was a very prominent feminist in the 60s, and she's passed by now. Anyway, I came to this book of hers with the intention of disagreeing with it, because it was such an important book of the feminist movement, of women's liberation in the 60s. She compared the lives of women living at home to prisoners of war living in a concentration camp. She compared the plight of women to that of slaves. And she said that keeping a clean home is mind-numbing work for a woman, therefore beneath her, and therefore she just hire another poorer woman to do it, because someone has to, right? And that I found kind of ironic. But of course, she didn't say any of those things quite like that. And the comparisons to war and slavery were a bit more subtle. And I don't know, someone else might find it distasteful. I didn't, but I did find the whole thing a little rough. But anyway, I was surprised to find the book was a bit nebulous. It was filled with some one-liners from people she talked to, anecdotes, and I found it a bit, how do I explain? Fuzzy, cloudy. The whole book seems like a blur now. And I cannot pick one specific chapter and speak about a specific issue. I do remember her criticizing Freud, which, good, valid. But honestly, the book seemed more like a stream of consciousness and very, very long. Could have been shorter. Could have been a Twitter thread. But of course, there was no Twitter then. Despite all of that, I still found some points of agreement with her. And I'm sorry if I'm looking down. I'm looking at my notes. I found some points of agreement with her, especially now I'm living as a housewife, a pregnant housewife. It's weird to say, but that's just my life at the moment. And honestly, it is kind of boring and isolating. This period of time, I don't have any family around. It's basically just my husband and I and his colleagues. I don't really have a close circle that I can lean on where I live. This is a temporary situation though. But it is the case that I have observed in the modern world, people seem to live atomized lives away from extended families, which is not how I want to live the rest of my life. And I think this is very common, especially in the United States. Regardless, that could be another video by itself. But you see, Betty talks about how pioneer women, the women who came to the United States with their husbands, shared in the work to bring about the new nation. That it was hard work, and that it all started at home. Most economic activity happened in the home way back in the day, with both men and women doing their part to their own capacities, of course. So the idea that women just stay at home and organize, it's a very modern idea. But then what happened? The Industrial Revolution happened. It took men outside of the home to work and reduced women's economic burden, or their share of responsibilities. And as the years progressed and the processes of home became easier with new technologies, accomplishing anything in the home was simply easier. Dishwasher, washing machines, vacuum, etc. And I'm very, very grateful for those things. Don't get me wrong, it leaves me time to read controversial books that give me away. What do you do with that extra time on your hands? It's like when man's work is no longer to survive. Now he can use his creative talents to do something a bit more white collar. Because let's be honest, this is not a book for people in blue collar families. This is not a book for women in poorer nations. This is a book for women in the middle to upper classes who are bored at home. In a world where the expectation, and when I say in a world, it's Betty's world, back in the 60s, where the expectation is that if you have a career, you are less feminine, then many women were driving themselves crazy with boredom. This might seem privileged, but it's also a reality. Having a lot of free time and choosing to do nothing with it, to have your daily life be so monotonous, can drive someone crazy. And yes, having kids will obviously change the dynamic, but I'm talking about the times before and the times after, right? So in that sense, I agree with Betty. The problem I found in Betty's book is that she indeed recognizes this problem, which a lot of conservatives these days fail to recognize or refuse to recognize. She did recognize the problem, but her solutions sometimes seem to be just find a job and to leave the kids at daycare. And as someone who has held jobs, they can be just as boring and soul-crushing. Except now you have to answer to someone and your time is limited. She did sort of mention following your passions, like for women who like to paint and to actually do it. And this day and age, it might look like creating content, editing videos, whatever your vibe might be, and to do that with intention. So again, after all of that, I think my biggest issue with her book was that the kids can just be dropped off at daycare. And I know a lot of people don't want to hear it, but there are plenty of studies and people speaking out against this with good proof and reasons why leaving your baby with complete strangers for 8 hours a day is not the best idea, especially when it comes to attachment. You know, I didn't know that kids younger than 3 experiences a parent leaving them like death or abandonment. They don't know that you're gonna come back. They actually grieve the parent because they had no idea what's happening. People don't want to think about this too much, but imagine doing that to your kid every single day. And I don't want to shame anyone that has to do this out of necessity. Obviously, it's the world we live in. Sometimes people have to do things that might not be the best options, but some people are choosing to do this just out of preference. I understand some people have to do this, and some people are choosing to do this because they think that this is the best option for children, for socializing them. I'm going to try to link some stuff in my description box to kind of dispel this myth a little bit. But going back to Betty's book, that idea of daycare and some dubious studies like Alfred Kinsey's were my biggest issues with the book, because Alfred Kinsey's studies have been debunked, and also the book was really long. But despite all of that, I was reading a forbidden books and I found myself surprised to see that I had more agreements with her than disagreements. The issue is, what do we do with this information? What do we do about the fact that women with children or just housewives can in fact feel bored and isolated at home? To me, just paying someone to do childcare is not the solution, especially not the majority of the week. I don't have all the answers. I think part of the solution could be starting to orient our lives around extended family and not thinking that the nuclear family is the solution for everything. And again, I don't have all the answers, and that might be disappointing to say at the end of this video. But I know, I'm very glad for the internet, because it allows me to create things and be creative from home, to learn things. And I think it will do the same for many women who do decide to stay at home. Now, the isolation issue, if I was in a bigger town, I would go out and take some classes, which I'm going to do once we move out of here. So in terms of that, I think it's something for all of us to figure out. If you live close to family that you get along with, lucky you. And if you have a good circle of friends that are in similar spots in your life, amazing. Betty, though, was clear in her book that she likes men, that she loves them, that she wants them to do well, and that pointing out this issue with women does not mean that she hates men, and that she laments that part of the movement, you know, the part that does actually hate men, is the one that's getting the most press and the loudest part of the movement. Isn't that funny? Perhaps that's just the case for everything. Controversy sells, rage sells. At the very beginning, I mentioned a very weak critique that I got that very much implied I should just read certain books and stay in an echo chamber. Now, I don't mean to harp on just this person, but he's an example of how many people think and how our minds stay small and how we are unable to make connections with people we disagree with. I did not expect to be making connections and agreements with Betty Friedan. Most people out here are calling others Nazis and fascists without ever really learning anything about what those ideologies meant. Not long ago, a couple weeks ago, I think, there was some information about how the US might incorporate a draft for women. Men in comment sections in women's magazines were showing their real petty side, saying things like, well, this is what you women wanted. This is what feminists wanted. When in reality, a lot of feminists wanted to abolish the draft for both men and women. This is not a black and white issue. I don't mind when people disagree. My issue is disagreeing with a side based on pure assumption. It irks me. And I am far from perfect on this either. I have made my mistakes as well. As I mentioned, I had disagreed with Betty in the past and criticized her without actually reading what she had to say, which is a point of shame for me. But the pride and arrogance that some people exude when uttering falsehoods as reality and not mere opinion really annoys me. So all this to say, I think we all have to find ways to learn and understand and read. If you're going to be hating on someone online, at least let your critique be truth rather than mere assumptions. As far as for what Betty said with boredom and isolation, well, thank God for the internet, right? I mean, it will not fix real life connections, but it does give us an outlet to learn, to create, to expand our minds, and to talk to other people. It does have its dark side though, as you can imagine. Whether you agree or disagree with Laura Bates and Betty Friedan, it is worth exploring different viewpoints. Rather than looking at those who choose to learn about different views with disdain, I have much more respect for those willing to put themselves in positions to learn outside of their echo chamber and engage in interesting and respectful disagreements. Anyway, I had to get all that off my chest. Maybe Betty wasn't as radical as I originally thought. Sorry, Betty. Or maybe I'm just missing some of her other material that I have not read. Next week, though, I might explore feminists and their preferences for fascism over conservatives. Cheers. And until next time.